everybody, and welcome to Fancy Friday. I am one of your co-hosts here, Danisha Mingo, and I am excited to be joined by our other co-host. First off, our licensed music therapist who just brought us in with some fabulous music, Mr. Donnie DL Music Lee.
Hey, hey.
And of course, our brand ambassador and board member with Solutions of Change, this beautiful woman, Trina Marie Shaw.
Hey.
And we are excited because May is actually Mental Health Awareness Month. And so this month's topic is critically important. As you all know, we started Fancy Friday in response to the pandemic to give people something to look forward to give them a reason to get dressed and productive and feel good and just have fun while normalizing the topic of mental health. And so tonight's topic is an especially important topic because it's one that many people deal with and they don't even realize. But we also saw increases in this during the pandemic due to people staying at home or maybe being already predispositioned to be at risk for it, and we saw it increase. And so we are excited to have our first guest with us, Ms. Hannah Kirkpatrick, as we talk about mental health and addiction on tonight. So Hannah Kirkpatrick is Mrs. America 2021, and to our knowledge, the first ever national pageant winner to self-identify as a person in long-term recovery from addictive illness, and that's 12 years in recovery. Can we just congratulate you and shout you out really quick, Hannah?
Oh, thanks, guys.
Amazing.
And we have to clarify, Mrs. American.
American.
Yes, 2021, yes. The very first.
Thank you. Look, we thank you for joining. I want to share a little bit more about you for our audience because you're a truly dynamic woman, Mrs. American. That you began competing in pageants at the age of 16 as a dare because you were such a tomboy, which we can't tell with this beautiful crown and how lovely you're looking tonight. And now, 23 years and many failed attempts later, you finally achieved the lifetime goal. Married to your husband, Chris, for 15 years, Hannah has supported and witnessed her sinking into the depths of alcoholism, depression, and destructive validation seeking and eating disorders, and then rising through recovery to finally become the healthy woman that she is today. Hannah's goal this year as Mrs. American is to use your experience to offer hope to those who are still suffering. Nearly 12 years sober, as I mentioned, you dare that we do recover. The recovery lifestyle is incredible, and the greatest act of courage is asking for help when necessary. Hannah will spend her year of reign as an ambassador for the Victoria's Voice Foundation to end addiction in middle and high schools around the nation and to promote the podcast called Business with Benefits that she co-hosts with her husband. Welcome.
Thank you so much. What a great.
Since you were a tomboy, tell us a little bit about how you got into fashion and what is your fashion now like today?
Sure. So I entered my first pageant on a dare because I was such a tomboy. I was a 3-season athlete. I really was the definition of an ugly duckling back then. And I was just awkward. I was gangly. I never wore heels or skirts or dresses, anything girly in any way. And so a postcard came in the mail to compete for Vermont Team USA. And everybody started laughing and said, there's no way that you could ever do that, Hannah. And I turned at them and I was like, did you just tell me I can't?
Yes, love it.
And that is how it started. I just needed to prove them wrong. And they were right, I couldn't. I showed up and I came in dead last my first time. Dead stinking last. If they were below last place, I would have achieved it my first time. But all it did was fuel the fire in me to get better. And so the next time I was first runner-up, and then I worked on this dream on and off all through my 20s and somewhat through my 30s. And I even went to nationals one other time and I was top 15 and I thought that I was finished. And then about 2 years ago, I just started to feel this tug on my heart that it was time for me to pull out the old gowns and pull out the old high heels and dust everything off and that for some strange reason I was being called back into pageantry, and I didn't know why, but now I absolutely know the truth of why I'm here, and I'm here to share my story. It's not at all about me. It's just about the opportunity to give some hope out there to some people that, especially as you mentioned in the beginning, especially now with COVID, are home and feel lonely and isolated and feel like maybe there's no hope to get out of this addictive cycle that they might be in, whether it's alcohol or whatever, you know?
So we see that you're definitely no stranger to being resilient. I do want to go into your story a little bit. Can you let us know where the addiction started?
Yeah, I think addiction is one of those crazy things that most people think it starts with the first time that you take a drink or the first time that you try an illicit drug. And for me, what I've learned about addiction over the years is that it's so much more in the mind, and it's a construct in us that we need something outside of us to fill in the whole of who we are inside, to make us more comfortable in our own skin. So I feel like I probably came into this life as with addictive illness, and it started triggering when I was 18 and I began drinking alcohol, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can feel like the cool girl, because I never was. I was never the popular girl. I never felt enough. I always felt like I wasn't pretty enough, and I wasn't smart enough, and I wasn't fast enough, or I wasn't really anything enough. And then the minute I put a little alcohol into the system, I was the life of the party. And, you know, I could do things that I normally wouldn't do. And all of a sudden, you know, I just would become a different person. So yeah, it didn't start for me until I was 18. I was this perfect little goody two shoes until then. And then the minute I tried it, it was a downhill spiral. I went off to college at ASU and started just trying anything and everything. And slowly I became a different person.
So when did you think that when did you might have had an idea that it might be a problem?
So my life was kind of one of those looked okay on paper stories. Even my closest family didn't know how self-destructive I was. I was compulsively overeating to the point where I was binge eating at night, maybe 20,000 calories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is like 4 bowls of cereal, and then ice cream, the entire thing, and then whipped cream on top of the ice cream, and then some chocolate chips on the whipped cream. And then when you're done with that, go make 2 or 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like, it was an incredible amount of food. And so that sugar was sort of one of my first addictions, right? To kind of just get a little high or check out. So people didn't notice that necessarily. And from there, the alcoholism, I mean, I went to Arizona State University. It's a top 10 party school in the country, you know? Yeah. And so everybody around me that I hung with was drinking the same way that I was. So nobody really thought it was too crazy that I would drink to blackout every single time I went out. And I wouldn't remember a lot of what I was doing. My parents, my family didn't see it. As long as I was able to keep okay grades, as long as I
thought it was college life and you'll be okay, you'll get over it, okay.
And then in my 20s, you know, you live that kind of Sex in the City type lifestyle, right? It's all glamorized. And so it for me was never, you know, being homeless, living under the bridge, drinking out of the brown paper bag. It all looked kind of glamorous, quite frankly, on the outside, but inside I was killing myself, and I wasn't progressing in my jobs. You know, I would go through jobs, get bored with them and quit, never quite live up to my potential fully. And there were just so many little micro destructions that I didn't realize how destructive I was actually being. I was still looking for validation in relationships outside of my marriage for a lot of the time, even if it was just an emotional connection, what we call an emotional affair now. I mean, that was happening consistently. But that doesn't look like people are taught to see addiction, you know?
Anna, you bring up so many important themes that I wish we had time to explore tonight, but you know, college life often can be a gateway because what we see as social drinking and just a part of a culture can definitely lead into something more serious. And then being able to be a functioning person with it, sometimes we don't think that, I mean, we're not, like you said, the homeless person or the drunk on the street or the person who's not having a job. And oftentimes we don't think that we are the ones with the problem. And if you were to look at the criteria in the DSM for substance use, it's actually quite lower than, I mean, many of us would qualify for substance use disorder according to the DSM. And I see you shaking your head, Donnie. So if you know those stats right off, that criteria right off, you can share it. But I think it's important because we live in a culture where drinking is so socially acceptable that really it can be a problem. So I'm happy to hear you also mention some of those micro issues like not maintaining a job and getting bored, or some of the other risky or behaviors that we can engage in and put ourselves at risk of harm or harming our loved ones, and we don't think they're so serious, especially if they're isolated from what we think is the problem. So can you share with us, what was that triggering event that told you, I have to change my life, I have to go into recovery?
Oh, yeah, I can. It's an embarrassing one. It's horrifyingly embarrassing, but I promised you guys I would bear all, because, you know, when my life was put back together, my husband and I were able to reunite, and I'm going to the end first, but we promised that we would be a completely open book. So I will tell you what happened. So the first male addiction that I ever had from when I was 18, I thought he was my first love. He ended up being really my first addiction. As a person, came back into my life 10 years later. And I had this obsessive compulsive fantasy that he was the one that would make all my problems disappear. That if only, you know, I could keep and maintain, make him love me, make him, you know, continue to love me, that we would, you know, ride off on the sunset, the prince on the white horse kind of situation. So I actually left my marriage to go pursue a relationship with this man who had come back into my life. And at that time, it all fell apart. I lost my job. I lost my car. My stuff was sort of put out on the street, if you will. Even my family, and I come from a really supportive, amazing, loving, well-educated family. Even my family sided with my husband. And they were like, I don't know who you are or what you're doing, but you were going down the wrong path. So I literally was like a country song. Like, I lost everything within a couple of months. And I became suicidal. After 2 weeks, that insane relationship, he up and walked out again, as one would expect, you know, from that sort of sociopathic type of a person. But I was equally responsible in my illness at that point in time. So he up and left. And then at that point, I had lost everything. And I realized that life was too painful and I didn't think that I could do it. So I became suicidal. I ended up getting into an intensive outpatient treatment program, and it was this 30-day program, and it was for depression. So I went in thinking I just need help with coping skills or, you know, whatever. And they said, in that, you can't drink for 30 days. And I was like, who are you talking to? I don't have a problem with alcohol. Like, I'm just a party girl. Alcohol is not my problem here. Everyone in the world is my problem. If everyone else would just behave like I wanted them to behave, I would have no issues, you know? And then I quickly realized, to my great horror, that I could not only not drink alcohol for 30 days, I couldn't not drink alcohol for 2 days or 3 days, but then I couldn't go to the bars and socialize and get validation from other people that would fill me and make me feel like I had self-worth and that I was okay. And so it was this combination of all of these things that it all at the same time, I ended up realizing that I was in a lot worse shape than I thought I was, and that I really needed an absolute overhaul. I needed a demolition of all the constructs that I thought that I was successfully using in my life, because it became readily apparent that if I was the CEO of my own life, I should be fired. So I fired myself, and I checked myself into 3 12-step programs all at once.
Wow. And
go hard or go home, baby, right?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because comorbidity is such a big thing within the recovery community. You know, sometimes people think that with addiction, it's just about the substance. And I mean, almost always there's something else, you know, that has to be addressed. And it makes the fight, you know, within the addiction harder, you know. And it seems yours was reversed. You went in for depression and found out, okay, it was the other way around. I do have a question for you. What type of support system did you set up upon leaving treatment?
So at that point in time, I was sleeping on a friend's couch who was kind enough to put me up. And like I said, my parents had sided with my husband, so I wasn't really talking to them. My support system really came from all the 12-step work that I was doing. So in those 3 12-step groups, I immediately started calling a sponsor the first thing every day. And then I was in 3 meetings a day at minimum every day. And I did that for 8 months.
Wow.
So that was really all there was to my life. You know, I mean, when you do a demolition, it's like you're on the dirt, you got nothing to do but build from scratch. And so, you know, if I were to go out for coffee, I would go out with someone in program. And I just would ask them every question I possibly could about how they had this thing that I wanted. I would see this like flicker in their eyes that looked something like contentment, or that looked like real happiness, and that they weren't out there searching for something like I always was. And I just wanted to soak up every little drop of that sort of wisdom that would give someone a comfort in their own skin. And eventually, after about 8 months of that, my husband, who'd been sort of watching from the sidelines, he had been trying to move on. Oops, sorry, Trina Marie.
I was going to say cheering you on, I'm sure.
Oh, well, he was cheering me on, but I had dragged him through the mud for so long. You know, I mean, I did everything and I was everything that you would never want a loved one to be. You know, I was the opposite of who you would hope that your spouse would be. And so everyone was giving him the advice to just move on, like leave her. She's crazy. She hurt you in every way. She's just a horrible human being. Just move on. And so he never actually, during that entire time, and here's a testament to Chris, he never called me a bad name. He never ran my name into the dirt. He defended me to his friends, and he started to learn about addiction. And when he did, he started to read all these books. He went to Barnes & Noble and bought like 6 books on addiction, and he would respond to people by saying, no, she's sick. She's not a bad person. She has addictive illness, and she's working on that. So that was incredible.
Yeah, big shout out to Chris. And I'm glad Donnie asked that question, because a recovery support system is one of the major mitigating factors, along with coping and perception when it comes to recovery. And so, you know, you sounds like, in addition to having him, although it may have taken him 8 months to come back in, but you surrounded yourself with that support and with your programs to ensure that you obtained your recovery and sobriety. So tell us, what was that when you say people, those sober people that you were dining with who had a sense of contentment, what was that you found for yourself, number one? And number two, how have you maintained recovery for 12 years?
I found it just by doing the work. You know, I'm really not a hero in this. And I think that's the greatest message that I really want to tell people. It took an entire village to pull me out of the mud and to start to rebuild me from scratch. And it was brick by brick by brick. And every one of those bricks was laid by someone else in the program who was also just doing their work and trying to keep themselves clean and sober and trying to grow a little bit more spiritually and emotionally more mature than they were yesterday. So sort of without even knowing it, I feel like that's what the community does when you really surround yourself in it. So the only thing that I ever have done in recovery really well is raise the white flag of surrender and said, I really don't know what I'm doing here. So I just need to get help. And that's why I love to tell people now that the greatest act of courage they can do is asking for help when they need it. Because if I had just continued to try to fight through this whole time, I would have continued to get the same results that I had, which were misery and discontent and hurting everyone around me. But I think the second part of that question is, how have I kept that recovery for 12 years? And I mean, I think it goes back to that very first day after 8 months when Chris came back to me and said, and I'll never forget it. He said, Hannah, you have finally become the woman that I always knew you could be, and you never allowed yourself to be. And I can't say that without choking up, because it's just so beautiful that he was able to watch this process of God's absolute transformation of a really broken, lost soul that was searching to fill what I now know is a God-sized hole in my heart with anything and everything and anyone that I could. And so in that moment, we said, we're going to put recovery as number one in our life. And we're going to be willing to share our story. And I know that anything that goes more important in my life than recovery, I'm going to lose if I rearrange those priorities. So as a family, we have that commitment to Hannah. When I get a little squirrely, which I do, y'all, I get a little squirrely all the time. When my brain just gets a little disheveled and I get, scared or overwhelmed or intimidated or insecure or whatever these feelings, like who knew how many feelings there were? Man alive, I did not know this whole feeling thing. It's not my gig. I didn't like to deal with them. I still don't like to deal with them. When they happen, now I have tools to be able to handle them. And so when they happen, Chris has the authority, because we set up these really clear new boundaries when we got back together, of complete transparency, really rigorous honesty with one another, which means he can say, hey, honey, get yourself to a meeting. And I have to accept that with grace. I have to. And we have those sorts of rules, that guard our relationship and keep us both safe in it. Recovery is at the top of the list, and it has to be, because only when my cup is full can I fill his and our children and everyone else around us.
Amen.
And I Amen. Too, that I know you don't call yourself a hero, but I definitely think that both you guys are heroes in my eyes, because to be able to share your story, and for him to be comfortable with sharing the story, to say, hey, because a lot of men don't take women back. They don't, right. They pride or whatever, they have a hard time. And for him to want to educate himself and understand what you were going through and realize that you were sick and that it was an illness, and that for him to want to be there and watch you go through the process to want to get better and to have the courage to step out on faith and trust the process is amazing. And if you can just answer this last question, sum it up real quick, because I know we have to end this amazing time right now, is if you can just tell someone, how will someone know when it's time? Because you say the greatest act of courage is asking for help when it's necessary. So how will someone know when it is necessary?
That's a beautiful question. I'm trying to think back. If there were a time earlier that I could have found recovery, if there's a discontent just being in your own skin, if there's this not enoughness, there's this self-worth there that just tells you these messages like you're not enough, you're not good enough, you'll never be good enough. That's addiction, ladies and gentlemen. To me, I'm no clinician. I mean, I'll let you guys be the pros, but to me, the one common thread in an addictive compulsive personality is that not enoughism. And it's often covered by this huge grandiosity and this arrogance to cover this deep insecurity that we all hold and that we all share. So to me, it's a personality trait. If you feel like nothing is ever enough, including yourself, you probably are ready to go get into some 12-step love and dig deeper and finally get to a place where you can look in the mirror and go, you are just amazing. And I love you how you are today, even in all your perfections.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
That's beautiful. I got chills. You know what? You ended it so perfectly, because when a person is feeling like nothing is enough, that's also a symptom of possibly depression or some other mental illness. So, we are talking about comorbidity. Probably said it better than me here. Hannah, I just want to tell you thank you for your transparency and sharing your story. I know through speaking with you that faith is another major component in your recovery and in your life today. And I just wish Chris would have got on. So I want to tell him thank you for you.
Yes. He's amazing.
For you. Thank you.
And for those of you who are out there listening with us, you can see all of her information here on the slide, that you can follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Real Hannah Kirkpatrick and at Mrs. American Official. She also has a podcast that she does with her amazing husband, which I'm sure they share a lot of their story together on, called Business with Benefits. So you can find that information at www.businesswithbenefits.us, and it's also here on the slide along with her social media handles and the YouTube channel. So please check Hannah out. Please shout her out and salute her for her amazing courage. You are a hero, and Chris is a hero for supporting you. Dealing with a family member or a loved one who's going through addiction is one of the hardest things I know personally, and so I just commend him for researching and finding out more so that he can support you through this. And I just pray for your continued wellness in all areas and prosperity, and ask that you continue this platform of sharing your amazing story to liberate others to find the courage to ask for help. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all that you guys are doing.
Thank you. God bless you. Have a great night.
Bye.